So, hello everyone. Welcome to this session, which is hosted by the IAPSM Karnataka chapter. This is called as IAPP, Intercollegiate Academic Program for Postgraduates. In fact, interestingly, this program started about a decade back. I was just talking to Dr. Kulkarni and I was remembering. So, this was a program which started as a physical or a offline program, what we call now. And basically, when this used to be like four colleges in the region here when Dr. Kulkarni was in KVG Sulia. So KVG Sulia, Yenapoya Medical College and KS Hegde Medical Academy and Manipal, they used to have a program where on rotation they used to meet in one of the colleges. And there the postgraduates could get the benefit of the best of all the colleges and all the faculty and their resources. So that was the idea. However, COVID came, and then now we have become much more convenient in using. We are conversant in using the technology, and we thought, why not? There's an opportunity. So again, Sir being the president of IAPSM Karnataka, this idea was floated, and then now we have these monthly online webinar program where we try to get experts not just in Karnataka but even from outside. And this is one of the programs today in a series of few which we have done in last couple of months. So today we have Dr. Parag Chavda who will be talking to us about pedagogy for postgraduates. More about Dr. Parag and a little about session in a while. I invite Dr. Kulkarni, who's with us, to welcome all of you as well as speak a few words in his capacity as the president and the leader. And he's also the president elect for IAPSM National. So, sir, Kulkarni, sir, over to you.
Thank you, Animesh. Good evening, all. It's my pleasure to be with you all today. Pedagogy from Prague, just talking that we started this IAPP with the intention to improve the teaching learning. Started in 2008 in KVG Medical College, Sulia, and now we have got a very good speaker, Parag. I know Parag since long time, and I thank Animesh for choosing Parag for this particular topic, a very, very important topic for postgraduates, because most of us are likely to join medical college as a teacher. Even otherwise, health education is our domain. So communication is very, very important for health education. So this topic I feel is apt and best person for this particular topic. So without taking much of your time, now I hand over the mic to Animesh back again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Just to introduce very briefly, as Parag has already told me that keep it very brief to introduce me. Of course, he is quite talented. He is one of the stars of IAPSM and he's doing quite well. And I'm proud that, today we have him here with us. So just briefly to tell you about Parag, Dr. Parag actually, he's associate professor in community medicine at the GMERS Medical College at Gotri in Vadodara. And he has multiple responsibilities too. So he wears many hats. He's also the member secretary for the Central Research Unit. He is the coordinator for the Student Startup and Innovation Cell. And he does multiple things. He's very active with the eConnect of platform of IAPSM National. And he's been very keenly interested in medical education and capacity building. In fact, when COVID came, we had a CBME group where we built capacity for about 200 faculty across India, and Parag was very actively involved, coordinating and getting all of us together. Other than that, Dr. Parag is also a FAMER fellow from CMC Ludhiana FAMER Center, and then he also serves as a faculty for the fellowship program currently in the CMC Ludhiana Center itself. He's been the editorial board member for Indian Journal of Community Medicine also. So, and he's got a lot of publications, keeps doing workshops, keeps doing research publications. So that's in brief about Dr. Parag. I'm very happy today that he's there. Let me also tell you that we've had 184 registrations, and that's one of the reasons why we've switched to this platform today. Yesterday we had to because we crossed 150 about yesterday morning, so we thought like we will change over, and that's why we are here, because Google Meet would not have allowed us on this. Interestingly, 65% of the people who are registered are first time attendees for IAPP program, and we've had about 24% of the people who've attended at least 1 to 2 sessions before. And there are people who attended, there are about 3.5% of the people who attended more than 5 programs. So welcome to you all, and over to Dr. Parag. Dr. Parag, would you be sharing the slides? You want me to do that? You just please let me know.
Yes, sir. I'll be sharing the slides, sir.
Sure.
I'll just adjust the PPT screen so that it's visible.
All right.
Yes. Animesh, sir, you can bring it to the frame now.
I'll do that.
Okay. So thank you, the IAPSM Karnataka State Chapter, Kulkarni sir, Animesh sir, Asha madam, and the entire state chapter for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all on this topic, which is close to my heart actually. Pedagogy, anything related to pedagogy is something I love experimenting with. So I'll just be sharing few of my thoughts around this topic. So thank you to the state chapter at the beginning. And let's just discuss. At the outset, I would just wish to express that primarily the session is intended for postgraduate students. So whatever I'll be speaking, I'll keep in mind that whatever we are discussing is primarily meant for a postgraduate students who might be new to pedagogy as a concept as part of their community medicine PG learning. I understand that some of the faculty members have also joined. So if during the course of interaction something comes up, we'll be able to discuss some of those points. So if we look at the session outline, this is how I have planned to devote some, let's say, 40 minutes of time initially to talk on a little bit conceptual clarity around the topic, and followed by we will have question answers if there are any questions around the topic. So we'll first, for the PG students, we'll clarify what is the concept of pedagogy, why pedagogy in PG curriculum for community medicine, what all about pedagogy that a postgraduate student needs to know or be capable of. And lastly, if many students in the questions have also asked, they have a concern about the pedagogy exercise which is there as part of the PG exam, the final exam, MD exam. And so they have asked a question as to how do they prepare for the same session. So we'll try and touch upon that as well. So if we start with the concepts first, uh, what pedagogy really means is it's the basically art and science of teaching and learning. In other words, it is a science of teaching methods. So there are different teaching methods which are available and the teachers use for different level of learners for different topics, right? So that way, and it's a beautiful, a very detailed and complex science, a lot to learn, and a lot to understand as well. Later on, people have also differentiated another term which goes by the name andragogy, and that's in the art and science of educating adults. So, and then people referred that pedagogy is primarily meant for children and andragogy primarily is meant for adults, where they differentiated that the way that adults learn is little different, in a sense that adults would have accumulated a handsome amount of experience as well around the topic of choice, so they can be expected to be a little more self-directed about their approach to learning. they would be very selective about what they wish to learn, versus, say, for example, school education, where the students do not really have a choice of topics. So, for example, in the or if we relate it to college education, in the MBBS, student has to pass through all 20 subjects, whereas later on for PG education, the student can choose on one particular specialty and can devote time and choose to understand it in more detail and learn in more detail one particular specialty of their choice. So that way. Now, it is a little difficult to, say, for example, compartmentalize pedagogy and andragogy watertight. So, at what age pedagogy stops and andragogy starts is very difficult to say. Some people opine that, let's say, when we think of our undergraduate students studying MBBS at our medical colleges, do we call it as pedagogy, or do we call it as andragogy? So, in particular for this session, we'll not go into that debate, and then Prabal will say that our concern at present is largely what are the principles, or what are the some of the methods of pedagogy that we should be using while we facilitate learning for our students, where the postgraduate students are also many a times participating. So postgraduate students are also taking sessions for undergraduate students. So when they are doing so, what concepts and methods or tools they could be using, that's our purpose. So without going into the terminologies, we largely will prefer to call it as pedagogy throughout the session, and many places the same word is used. So we'll stick with that term. Now, having clarified little bit about the basic concepts around pedagogy, why pedagogy as part of an important component of PG learning. So many of us feel, as Kulkarni sir referred to earlier, that many of us take up faculty positions in medical colleges as one of the career tracks, and that has been one of the most commonly explored career tracks after MD Community Medicine. But the other career tracks also people are nowadays opting for. So the other career tracks are a full-time researcher careers, maybe with ICMR or other organizations, or a full-time career as a public health manager, maybe in the government health system, or someone might prefer to be a clinician. So my take is that whatever be the career track that one chooses, some of the competencies around pedagogy would be applicable in all those career tracks. So all of us understand that when we take a faculty positions, obviously the pedagogy competencies are important because we are teaching students primarily. But for a researcher also, so when a researcher takes up multi-centered research projects with which very large in scope, there will be many collectors and a large data collection team, and where we would have to ensure that the uniformity of data collection happens. So you'll need to train the team of data collectors as well. If I'm a public health manager, there will be new programs and new components being added to the programs as well. So all the healthcare staff who are involved in delivering healthcare services through those new programs will need to be trained on those new components. So for example, in tuberculosis, so many new things have come up. Our logistics management systems have improved a lot. A lot of our programs are switching on to the digital mode. So all of our health workers and staff need to be trained on how to use digital technology and so on, to the extent that ashas are now using tablets and the digital form of data entry. So many new things are coming up in. So even if you are a public health manager, there will be places where you as a public health manager, so say for example as a district non-communicable disease consultant, you might not be facilitating each training, but then at least you should be aware as to, if I were to supervise, or if I were to plan, or if I were to evaluate a training, what are the different components which would go in. So that conceptual clarity, that conceptual understanding needs to be there. As a clinician, you could be training patient support groups, or family members of particular group of people with certain kind of illness and so on. Second aspect is pedagogy is also a science which is developing, and there are a lot many new changes are coming up. Technology is coming up in a big way, so one needs to be keeping updated with the technology as well. So as Animesh sir earlier mentioned, that with COVID, all of us, this IAPP program, which was earlier on site, has become online now, and we are enjoying the benefits. So people from outside Karnataka are also being able to attend the program now. So unless we would have kept on with the technology and the benefits, probably this would not have happened. uh, Another important thing is there, which is there on the image on the right side, is this: if, for example, if the PG student wishes to learn a particular topic in the within the syllabus of community medicine, there are different methods of learning. So how do I memorize certain aspects which I need to learn as an MD community medicine student? So I could be attending lectures, or I could be reading books, or I could be seeing a demonstration. And then as we go down, the chances of retention or the retention rates increase, right? So just attending a lecture, I might be able to retain only 5% of what I heard within the lecture. But if I go down to a little bit more complex methods such as teaching others, the retention rate is quite higher. So people say that in educational domain, people say that if you are able to teach others, you will be able to memorize or retain almost 90% of what you have taught or what you ended up learning, right? So this many people have also utilized. Say, for example, many times informally you would have seen that one particular PG students, when he or she learns a particular aspect within the curriculum, he or she would prefer to teach it to others. So when you teach it to others, you are probably better prepared. Your concepts would get more clarified. Your connections would be made between your prior knowledge and the new knowledge that you have learned, and so on. So teaching others as one of the activity also helps your own learning. And last but not the least, it's at many places it's there as part of the final MD exams, the pedagogy exercise. So if that's there, surely we would need to devote some amount of time to be prepared to undertake that exercise. So these were some of the reasons why I feel pedagogy is an important competency area to be mastered by any MD community medicine student. Now, since we have talked about the pedagogy exercise as part of the PG exam, I'll spend a couple of slides on explaining what is my understanding about the pedagogy exercise. So pedagogy exercise is a session where a PG student who is undergoing the exam demonstrates a short teaching session. Uh, Here, the more important part about the conceptual understanding of pedagogy exercise is what the examiners are examining the PG student is the method of teaching rather than the content of teaching. So, say for example, if the PG student has chosen the topic to teach the undergraduate students on, say for example, management of diarrhea, or might be taking up the topic of contraception, so the examiners would not be so much interested in knowing, in checking whether the student knows about contraception. Examiners would be more interested in finding out if the student can adequately teach the students whatever needs to be taught about contraception, and how well is the student able to teach it to the student. So how well is this PG student able to facilitate students learning around that topic. So focus is more on teaching rather than the content. uh, this is how the session might look like. Now at different places there could be a little bit of variations of this, but this is one such generic version where if the exam spreads across 2 days, pedagogy exercise, many places it's on day 2. So before the session, on the day 1, maybe the topic is usually pre-decided. At many places the students are given a choice, that students can come up with 2 or 3 topics, and choice of topic is made the previous day. The student has at least 1 day of time to prepare on that particular topic. Student is expected to prepare a lesson plan. In the next couple of, I mean, in the next minutes to come, we are going to talk about what's a lesson plan. And the students are also expected to share with examiners a hard copy of the lesson plan, the lesson that he or she would have prepared. Now what happens when the student actually demonstrates that pedagogy simulated learning session? A student demonstrates the teaching session, and although the students might have prepared the lesson plan for a longer duration, maybe for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, actually it would happen that the students, I mean, it might not be possible for the students to go on that long. So usually students would be asked to take a pause, maybe at 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes, followed by questions from the examiners. Who are sitting as an audience could be simulated students, maybe other PG students of the department could be sitting there, and the student is free to use any aids such as PPT or maybe whiteboard or blackboard and so on. So this is a generic idea about how the pedagogy exercise would happen in PG exams. Now, having discussed very briefly about why pedagogy is an important competency to be acquired by postgraduate students in community medicine, let's move to a little bit more detail about, let's say, what exactly needs to know about pedagogy in general. So these are some of the examples. So for example, if I say that pedagogy is also an important competency to be acquired by a PG in community medicine, so competency would be that the student is able to plan and conduct a short duration of training for any health professional. So it could be for undergraduate students, or it could be for medical officers, or maybe for ASHA workers, or maybe for female health workers. So I've just illustrated some of the examples, right? So for example, it's checking the ability of the PG student, whether he or she is able to plan as well as conduct a 2 days training of medical officers on routine immunization under the National Health Mission. Is the person able to plan and conduct a 3 days induction training for newly recruited community health officers, CHOs, who are now positioned at health and wellness centers? Or if the person is able to plan and deliver a hybrid training, online few online lectures followed by some certain amount of demonstrations online, uh, of a session for pharmacists of a district on the topics such as inventory management. So as public health manager, you would come across situations like this, where you will be required to train certain cadres of staff on important topics, right? So the PG student should, at the end of the PG tenure, should be able to plan as well as deliver. Now when we say conduct, we do not mean that the entire training could be conducted by one person. It would be a team. So a person obviously would be able to take help of other members of the team, but the person should be able to plan and also should be able to facilitate some sessions within those trainings. Now, how do I say it, or how do I know that I have built up this particular competency in myself? So to be able to do so, how do I acquire this particular competency? How do I become good teacher? It If we can broadly divide it into two aspects, one is the conceptual domain, where I become little bit more aware about the pedagogy concepts in detail, and the second aspect is the skill aspect, which tells me that lesson plans skill means that I am able to plan, let's say, training or plan a particular teaching learning session. And there are some skills such as facilitation skills also. While I am delivering a session, I am required, as a teacher, I am required to demonstrate certain kind of skills as well, to be called as, so that students find it enjoyable experience at the end. So those are called as facilitation skills. Now we'll be talking about them one by one. Let's start with the conceptual awareness. So what are the different topics which PG students needs to be a little bit aware about around the pedagogy? So this is a small list of topics. This comes from an article which is recently published. I will just briefly go through these concepts. So group dynamics and team working. So all of us understand that when students learn, a lot of learning also happens within the groups. So one needs to be aware about how the groups function. So there are multiple stages of group dynamics, where the groups are forming, and then there could be an initial storming period, and then the groups come down to norming, where they actually come down to business, and finally the last stage is performing, where they come out with the outcome. Right. The other basic domains of pedagogy are domains of learning. So all of us learn new things every day, right? So what are the different domains in which we acquire new knowledge? So it could be the domain of knowledge, which we call it as the domain of head, where new thoughts would come up. The other domain is affective domain, which we call it as the domain of heart, where we feel. So the domain of affective domain could be, say for example, around whether the postgraduate student is able, or whether an undergraduate student is able to, let's say, counsel a person who is in anxiety, right? And the last domain is psychomotor domain, which talks about the hand movements, right? So say for example, are you able to give an intramuscular injection? So a lot of psychomotor, which means the coordination between mind and hand is happening. So are you able to correctly give the intramuscular injection using the correct technique or not? So if the objective is in that domain, we call it as a psychomotor domain. So there are different domains of learning. There could be learning objectives as well. So learning objectives are usually for a particular session, and learning objectives are also attached to the domain. So objective could be of cognitive domain, or it could be of affective domain, or it could be of psychomotor domain. Then the another concept to understand is interactive teaching methods. So all of us in our life would have attended lectures which uh, could not, say for example, grab our attention, or we were distracted at many points in time when attending the sessions. So there lies the skill of the teacher to keep the students focus on the topic of interest or the topic which is being delivered. So how does the teacher involve interactivity within the class so that the students attention is on the topic of discussion there and there. So there are multiple ways of interaction. People say that students and teachers can interact with each other. So it is not just a one way of communication that the teacher speaks and the students are listening. It could be from one student to another student. So there are methods such as think, pair, and share. The students could be asked to think individually about certain aspects. So, for example, what are the common reasons why people in tribal areas do not immunize or vaccinate their children? So students can think individually and then share what they thought, what are the reasons, with a peer, which means the student sitting next to them, and then make such pairs, and such pairs uh, would then share it, whoever a teacher calls could then share it with the larger group as well. So such kind of methods can also be employed where the students interact with each other. And the third kind of interaction is where the students are interacting with the content. So say for example, if the teacher displays an multiple choice question on the PPT slide and gives, let's say, 1 minute of time to the students to solve that particular MCQ, or if the teacher displays a picture and which is an incomplete picture, or maybe the picture has some deficiency, or teacher might have indicated one particular area of the picture and ask the students to identify something around that picture. So that's how the students are interacting with the content as well, right? So there are multiple kinds of methods that of interactive which could be employed to make the session more engaging. Simulation these days is coming up in a very big way. There could be mannequins which simulate human beings, or for affective domain, for communication skills, uh, uh, let's say someone within the department can simulate, can play the role of a patient, or can play the role of a doctor, and we can have a simulated setting so that it's a safe setting to practice communication skills teaching for undergraduate students as well. Student assessment means taking exams for the students. So a student assessment is also an important component as to how do you ensure that the exams are proper. So formative, there are multiple types of assessment. Summative is the university exams. Formative is whatever happens before the university exam, which means formative assessment, the primary purpose is to give feedback to the student so the student can improvise. So we have known that there are internal exams also for undergraduate students. So internal exams can be thought of as formative assessment, which gives students a feedback as to where do they stand, how much amount and what they needed to learn, let's say at the end of 3 months within second MBBS, or maybe at the end of 6 months in second MBBS, and so on, and whether they have achieved that much progress of learning or not. Feedback is an important a skill to be practiced, and I mean, many of educators believe that among the many methods that teachers use, feedback is one of the most prominent and most effective method for the students learning. uh, as, if we go more into detail about the assessment of knowledge can be done through different ways. There could be structured essay type questions or multiple choice questions, and with the NEET and next coming up, there is a lot of focus on, say for example, the questions which are checking the higher order within the cognitive domain. So the questions which are checking the analytical ability of the students, or questions which are checking the understanding of the student, and so on. uh, with the next coming up at the end of internship, next part 2, we are expecting then a lot of practical skills checking for undergraduate students as part of the licentiate exam would also come up. So a lot of OSCE stations would come up is next part 2. So community medicine departments would all of us, it's all of us, up to all of us to remain better equipped. It's time for us to be equipped with OSCE stations as well. So there are a lot many things in community medicine as well which can be subjected to be checked on an OSCE station. So for example, uh, communications. So if the person is able to counsel a mother of under 5 child who has diarrhea, and if the person is able to counsel the mother on oral rehydration, so that could be something which could be asked in station in community medicine. So postgraduate students could be one of the observers when the students are undergoing such stations. So there, if the postgraduate student is aware about the concept of OSCE and what is to be observed, and how careful to remain on OSCE station as an observer, that would be important. Mentoring is also an important concept which is coming up. uh, The next part are two important parts. One is lesson plan and the other one is facilitation skills. So very quickly go through the lesson plan. So what's a lesson plan? So lesson is any instructional unit. Instruction is an English word. Instruction means education, or instruction means learning, right? So lesson is any activity, any learning activity where the learning happens. So it could, learning could happen in lectures, or learning could happen in tutorials, or during family visits, or during field visits, and so on. Fine. So whatever structured activity that the department plans is a lesson. And how do you plan a lesson? So lesson plan is a blueprint of how the teacher wants to conduct that particular learning session for the students. So what are the components of a lesson plan? So lesson plan usually, in the next slide we are coming down to one example. On two slides we'll see one example of a lesson plan. So on this slide we'll just briefly understand as to what all components would be there in my lesson plan. So the lesson plan first addresses the why component, why the students need to learn this particular session. Let's say maybe 30-minute session, or 1 hour session, or maybe a 2 hour session. So what are the learning objectives for the session? The lesson plan also needs the teacher to be reflecting and being aware as to who are the learners, what's the level of the learners, what is the content that the teacher wants to cover. So whether it is something from environment, or maybe from nutrition, or maybe from occupation health, and so on. And an important aspect is how does the teacher facilitate students learning. So that would be, which is the method, teaching method that the teacher adopts. There could be some of the aids that the teacher might be wishing to use, say for example a video, or maybe a PowerPoint slide, or maybe a picture, and so on. And how does the teacher know periodically whether the students are following up, whether the students are learning, and so on. So these are the conceptual things which could be there in a lesson plan. And we would now have a look at one such lesson plan. So this particular thing, what's there in the blue color, is the what component of a lesson plan. So we say that, so for example, if this is a lesson plan for a lecture for undergraduate students in community medicine, we could specify that this broadly comes from the theme of environment health. And this particular lesson plan addresses the competency of community medicine 3.2, somewhere around water purification processes on small scale, right? So that addresses what does this lesson plan all about. Second aspect is number of students. So the teacher has to specify how many students, I mean what would be the size of the students, whether it would be 100 students, or it would be just so for example 25 or 30 students, as we sometimes have in clinical postings, and so on. What's the level of students? That's also important for the teacher to understand. So say for example, if this same topic, say for example if nutrition is being taught to first MBBS students, the level of depth that you would reach at first for a first MBBS student would be different compared to you teaching the same components of nutrition when the student comes in third year part 1. Similarly, so for example, if you are teaching the students around issues of sociology, you might reach different depths where by the time the students comes up to internship and starts attending OPDs within the peripheral clinics. So there the students would have much more understanding about the sociology which is happening around patients, right? So the level of learning is important for the teacher to understand, so that the entire lesson plan can be tailor made for that particular level of learners. Another important part about the learners would also be that the learners would come up with two types of knowledges, prior knowledge. So the learners would have prior experiences also. So for example, if we are teaching nutrition to students, the students might not have prior experience about, students might have in fact have prior experience about learning nutrition in school days. Or if the student, we are teaching sociology to students would obviously have experienced a lot of cultural practices around them while they are brought up in their schools, within their communities, and so on. So all of those are prior experiences with which the students comes up. So it would be important and helpful for the teacher if the teacher can link that prior experience with what new the student needs to be learning, right? So in a sociology class where a teacher is teaching the students as to what are the different reasons for which community in general do not adopt contraception, so many of the students are already aware about those concepts. It's not that one student reads those reasons from the book that the students would be coming to know, right? So if we are able to link that with the prior experience, probably the retention would be better, the understanding would be better. Another important aspects which now is important in CBMA curriculum is integration. So the student would not only be learning that particular aspect or that particular topic from community medicine. Student would have learned a lot about that from anatomy, from physiology, from microbiology, from pharmacology, or maybe from clinical subjects second year onwards as well. So if you are able to relate to whatever we are talking about to the students learning from other subjects, the students would be able to form linkages, right? So that helps. So who are the students, who are my learners, would depend. So if I am talking about, if I'm teaching treatment of malaria to undergraduate students versus I've been teaching treatment of malaria to asha, or versus I'm teaching treatment of malaria to female health workers, the way I approach it would be different. The third part is why that particular learning is happening for that particular group of learners. So there we start with the learning objectives. So the learning objectives as it is stated here could be that the at the end of the session student is able to describe importance of water purification or describe methods of water purification used, or more importantly the last one is so that the student is able to, as a basic doctor, the student is able to advise the family to choose a preferred water purification method at their households. Now a lot many components would come up here. It would not just be which is the best method, but it would also be which is a more economical method. So a lot of that decision making goes in. So if I as a teacher want my undergraduate students to be able to advise a family member on a preferred method, probably the student needs to come up at a higher level of learning, right? So that's my purpose. So why am I why in second MBBS, maybe somewhere in small group teaching we are teaching students the small group I mean water purification processes or methods for small group, is so that as a basic doctor when he is discharging a patient with typhoid fever, he is better capable of advising the prevention aspect as well. So next time for the typhoid not to happen, what the family can feasibly do within the available restraints. So now in the second slide we'll have, so this table is what we call the second part of the lesson plan, where the time is divided. So what the teacher would be doing across those, let's say for example 50 minutes or 55 minutes, is this one such session plan. Now I do not claim that this is the best lesson plan, and for different teachers could have different takes and different styles or different preferences. So as such there is no such ideal lesson plan, right? So different people could prefer different things as well. So the way that we divide the content across whatever is the duration is in three parts. The first part is setting induction, so where we start arouse interest of the students in that particular topic. Second is the progression, a large part where we actually deliver the content. And the last part is summary, where we conclude the session with telling the students or ensuring that the students are going back with the key take home messages from the session, right? Or the content is clarified in the minds of the students, right? So this is just one such sample. So what is displayed on the table is method of delivery. So at some places, say set induction, there could be multiple methods that we could be using. So storytelling is one such method. So as the teacher becomes more and more experienced, the teacher would have multiple stories. So say for example, if I wish to share a story of waterborne disease outbreak, if I as a faculty member in community medicine would have investigated outbreaks, I would be able to tell the students my own stories as well. If I have not been able to participate much, probably I could gather some of the news clippings around the relevant local ones around that particular disease outbreaks waterborne within the area. So there could be multiple methods of setting induction, arousing interest within the students. The other methods are lecture that we have mentioned, and media at some places. In my session I prefer to show them a sample of chlorine tablet, because many of the time by the time they reach internship they are not really aware as to how the chlorine tablet would look like. So we could be using different methods, right? What we have observed is how does the students attention progress? So for example, if we are talk about a 60-minute long lecture, this is a graph showing the students attention. So we understand that at the start of the lecture not everyone might be attentive, but at the teacher starts setting induction, the attention would increase, but then there would be a time where the attention would start falling. Fine. So people say that at the end of initial 15 minutes or 20 minutes, when the same teacher is taking a session, the attention would start falling. So it is this time where a certain amount of stimulus variation needs to happen. The teacher needs to take a break and then maybe engage the students in some activity. So if we go back to this here, after the initial 15 minutes, we are giving, let's say, 3 MCQs to the students. So there is some amount of stimulus variation, right? So teacher takes a pause and expects the students to solve those MCQs. uh, After another set of 15 minutes, another set of MCQs can come up. Now since the students would have learned most of the methods around water purification, we can really use case scenario based MCQs. Given a situation, which method do you feel would be a preferred method here? Fine. And finally the summary, right? So if we are using as a method of stimulus variation MCQs, the formative assessment also happens, where the students are checking for themselves that whatever we learned in previous 15 minutes, are we able to answer those questions or not. If we are not using MCQs, maybe towards the end MCQs can also be used as one of the formative assessment methods. People have used different methods. People have used quizzes also within the classes, right? So formative assessment helps the students to check whether the students are following up with the content or not. So that was with the lesson plan, the concept of lesson plan. Now let's move on to the second skill, which is the facilitation skills. So these are the skills which the teacher needs to be equipped with when the teacher takes on any teaching session. So what are the facilitation skills? So the skills of explaining. Now all of us would have observed that when we attend the same lecture being taken by different teachers, each one would have different method of explaining, right? So if I see an anatomy teacher, probably since anatomy needs a lot many new words to be memorized, many a times the teachers from preclinical sciences tend to make abbreviations and acronyms to help the students memorize those names, right? So I mean, different teachers based on the need would probably employ different methods of explaining it to the students. Skills of illustration, which means skills of explaining the same thing using some example. Fine. Skills of blackboard writing. So in the new days many of us are using PPTs, but sometimes PPTs would not work, or many a times nowadays students express the need that if you teach us on the whiteboard or blackboard, we would usually prefer that compared to a PPT. So that's also an important skill which holds still an importance in current era as well. The skill of questioning, all of us would feel that there is nothing much to let's say learn in questioning, but the most important thing to learn in questioning is how long is the teacher able to sustain that discomfortable pause which happens after the teacher asks a question. So usually students take some amount of time to get comfortable to understand what the teacher really wishes to ask, to allay their fears as to whether my answer is the correct answer or not, or whether what I'm going to speak is what the teacher is expecting, or whether it's a little bit different, or would I be scolded, and so on. So skill of questioning is also an important skill to be learned. How long can you wait for the students to come up with answers? Many a times the teachers cannot wait and just prompt the answers themselves, which is not the correct way. Skills of demonstration, so certain things need to be demonstrated. And then teaching also needs is a lot of communication, right? So information exchange and a lot of communication. So verbal communication means the choice of words. Now choice of words in teaching means how can the teacher make the same content in simpler words so that the students can understand. Paraverbal communication is all that you can do with your voice. So we many a times would have come across people who have a monotonous voice, so they do not have voice modulations, so they speak at the same speed. They do not emphasize as an important words, or they do not take pauses in between. Fine. So all those things are called as voice modulation. So you modulate your voice, which means that you raise your volume of your voice at certain points to lay emphasis on that particular word maybe, or you take pauses in between where you want the students to process and sink in that information, that new component, that new information that you have shared with the students, and you would wish the students take some time to really understand what you have already shared. And then a lot of non-verbal communication happens. So say for example, the way the teacher is moving within the class, or the way the students the teacher is standing in front of the students, or the way the teacher is gesturing with their hands, the way the student is using their head to show some amount of communication. So all these are, so body language or gestures are also a extremely important part of teaching skills. So but imagine a teacher who is teaching standing there in a monotonous voice, and then keeping his or her hand in pockets. We would find it very uncomfortable listening and receiving information, right? So all of us would want to attend lectures by a teacher who is vivacious, moving around in the class, modulating voice, giving more emphasis at certain points, giving us time to process the information, stimulating our ideas, and keeping us engaged, right? So whatever we want from our teacher in a teaching session, many of those things we should be able to demonstrate when we are facilitating such learning sessions as a teacher. So this is not an exhaustive list. There could be many facilitation skills, and it's also not necessary to use each of those skills in each of those of our sessions, fine. So it would be up to the teacher to decide what to use, right? And with that we come down to a new concept which is called as micro teaching. So many of times, sometimes we call that there are certain teachers who are born teachers, fine. So they are gifted with all the skills of teaching, and they take excellent sessions, fine. But at the same time, many educators feels that competency within pedagogy is also something which can be acquired, which can be learned through practice, right? And that is precisely called as micro teaching, fine. So we practicing facilitation skills by teacher in a safe environment is called as micro teaching. So how does micro teaching happen, or how do we can make use of micro teaching as one of the methods of improvising our teaching practices, or improvising myself as a teacher or myself as a facilitator? Is I'll be picking up one skill at a time. So say for example, I might pick up one skills. I just want to check whether my voice modulation is good enough or not. So that could be just one facilitation skills that I have picked up. Or say for example, I could pick up anything else from the previous slide. I could be checking whether I am good at storytelling or not, right? So I could be picking up storytelling as one of the facilitation skills on a particular micro teaching practice session. It would be delivered for a small content which can be delivered in very short duration of 5 to 7 minutes. This is not a full length lecture, right? And it happens in not in front of real students, in front of simulated learners. So simulated learners and small group of learners. So for example, maybe just 4 or 5 people, right? So simulated learners which the teacher is comfortable performing in front of, right? So say for example, if I'm a second year postgraduate students, I might not be comfortable performing in front of the third year student, but I might be comfortable performing with my colleagues who are in second year of residency, right? So what's more important is that the group of students should be the ones which the trainee teacher is comfortable with, fine. So this is the flow of the session which happens in micro teaching. So teacher identifies one such facilitation skills which he or she wishes to demonstrate or improve upon or wishes to check. Teacher invites few of the peers to observe the session. The session is usually conducted for 5 to 7 minutes, and it's also video recorded. Now we do not need very high fidelity equipment for this. Just a simple mobile phone, regular mobile phone on a tripod stand would also work just fine. This method comes up from the article which is cited at the bottom of the slide. So that way the session happens and is video recorded. What happens after the session is, while the observers are discussing within that small group of 4 to 5 people as to, and that discussion also happens particularly focused not on the content but on that particular skill which was chosen. So if the skill chosen was storytelling, or if the skill chosen was voice modulation, the group would discuss how voice modulation was actually performed in that particular practice session, right? And the feedback is not individual feedback. So not each of those 4 people are individually giving feedback. It's a group feedback. So someone is a repertoire, someone who compiles what the group discussed at the end, and then would share it as a group feedback, so that the person does not know that this particular thing came up from that person or this person and so on. So it's a group feedback, right? So it's that way anonymized. The teacher parallelly is also rewatching the video. So the teacher has an option of looking at uh, how I performed in front of the camera, right? So this is a very revealing exercise. So say for example, if one fine day you record one such micro teaching session for yourself, and you observe yourself, you will realize so many things about the way we conduct teaching sessions. So this is a very interesting exercise in that sense. So teacher also gets some time to self review, followed by feedback from the peers whom they are comfortable with. So it's assumed that they would be the trained teacher would be comfortable receiving that feedback, right? And uh, at the end of it, it's not necessary for the teacher to replan and retake that session. If the teacher decides that he or she wishes to improvise and again wishes to conduct the same session with an version of it, they can request to the same group of facilitators. So that's how the micro teaching session happens, and that's how this way of micro teaching practice sessions would help teacher refine all those small micro skills, right? So just one session would obviously not suffice. Multiple sessions would need to be taken with keeping focus on one skill for a particular session and so on. So this is what I wanted to share about micro teaching. Now over the last couple of last slide for the session, uh, so for example, many students ask questions as to share some of the materials which we can refer to, or some of the resources which we can use to understand the concept of micro teaching. So if you just need to if you wish to start with gathering some of the basic concepts of, if you just wish to gather a little bit of knowledge about the pedagogy in general, maybe these are some of the mentioned are two of the books. Those are the cover shots. Maybe you can you will be those books will be available in your college library. Under IAPSM eConnect, Dr. Liaka Drupesh volunteered to form an entire short video series. So each video is very short, maybe around 5 minutes, 7 minutes, or 8 minutes, and so on. So some important components of pedagogy, Dr. Liaka has very nicely described and explained to us in form of concept maps. So that's available on IAPSM eConnect as one of the playlists. The playlist goes by the name Pedagogy short course. So all these books and the other resources that I am sharing, they will be available on the description of the YouTube video that you are watching at the end of the session. So to conceptual clarity, these are some of the things available. Another important thing that the postgraduate students can take help of is, for most of our national health programs, we have the training manual for the participants, and we have a facilitator module also, which gives beautifully in detail as to how do we facilitate training sessions for, say for example, female health workers or for medical officers and so on, right? So some of such facilitator modules are also given in the description of the YouTube video that you will be getting at the end of the session. How do you master skills? So these are some of the tips. So say for example, you might have your favorite teachers, and many times in many of the community medicine departments, the postgraduate students do attend the undergraduate lectures which are taken by the faculty members of the respective departments. So identify your favorite teachers maybe, and when while attending the lecture, we understand that you are revising the content which you learned in undergraduate days, but also spend some time to observe some of those facilitation skills that the teacher utilizes. You would obviously know that this particular skill of this particular teacher, or he or she uses this very well, right? Some could be very good at storytelling and so on. So if you can observe and maybe mimic some of those, that could be one of the methods of learning those facilitation skills. Conduct as many micro teaching sessions as you can. Participate actively in undergraduate teaching within the department. So in most of the departments, undergraduate students do take PG students do take part in undergraduate teaching. So when you are given, prepare a lesson plan and maybe implement some of the things that you have learned through micro or acquired through micro teaching sessions in the undergraduate your teaching sessions as well. Many of the PG students do not actually participate in trainings of the field health staff, but the student should be actively seeking opportunities and should be participating in this as well. So there would be district training teams who would be training on a regular basis a batch of health workers for routine immunization, or a batch of say for example laboratory technicians, or a batch of senior treatment supervisors in tuberculosis, or say for example the pharmacist in inventory management, and so many trainings would be happening around within the district for different levels of health staffs. So PG students should be participating there also, not only in conducting the sessions but also in the during the planning stage itself. And those facilitator guides would be of help when you are planning that. So I guess that's what I wanted to share, a brief initial ideas about the pedagogy. With that, I'll take a pause, and we I get back to Animesh sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Parag. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Parag. So I think yes, within the time frame, I think you have given a overview, as well as you touched upon many of the important aspects. Now I want to open it for questions. Already there are a few questions in the chat. I will also take some questions which I have taken from the registration form. We had an open question where people could put. So if you allow me, can I just go with some of those questions, Dr. Parag?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I think you have already covered about many of the questions which had come in various ways, which was about how to deliver, or how do we go about pedagogy, the methodology related to that. But somebody has asked, how do we start the session? I mean, somebody has asked that, and then, like, should we always start with a story? And what is the best way to start? So, any take on that? Any ideas?
Yes, Animesh sir. So we refer to this as setting induction for the session. And setting induction is one of the most crucial times for any session. So if the teacher is able to grab attention of the students at the start of the class, probably the attention would be able to sustain. Otherwise, it's let's say a failed game from the beginning, right? So
Right.
storytelling very commonly is used by many teachers, but there could be other ways as well. So say for example, if you are showing them let's say an MCQ, which was a very favorite MCQ from past NEET PG exams. So why I'm saying this, because these days a lot of students attention is paid towards the NEET PG, the final format in which they would probably appear, right? So we should be looking at the students preferences also. So if you share with the students 5 MCQs which appeared in NEET PG exams from that particular topic on which you are facilitating a learning session, probably that's something which would be the maximum short guarantee that it would grab their attention. That if the end of the session I am able to answer these 5 MCQs, why not pay attention to the session as well? Another thing could be, say for example, share them a video story, or a news video story, as I just mentioned over here. Storytelling could be stories coming from what you have read, stories coming from your own personal life experiences, stories which you would have heard from your patients, and so on. So there are multiple methods of setting induction that one could use. The only idea being, the setting induction purpose is to grab attention of the audience, and so that the audience feels that, oh, okay, this is the reason why I need to pay attention to whatever would happen in this learning session.
Okay, so thank you, Parag. There are also questions on methodology related to lesson plan and all, but I think you have fairly covered it, so I'll not go into that. But if pardon me if I have missed it, but I think somebody wanted to, like, there are two or three people who wanted to know about specific learning objectives as well as the domains of learning, or the Bloom's taxonomy as we know it. So if you could just briefly touch upon that and then clarify, so that they get the concept basically.
Okay. So we earlier in the discussion we talked about the three domains: cognitive being the knowledge domain, affective being the communication skills domain, or largely how we feel. The large one being psychomotor, where the some kind of the hand movements and hand work is involved. So specific learning objective is, so let's differentiate competency and specific learning objective, right? So competency would be a little bit larger concept. So say for example, competency for me is at the end of an MBBS period, the Indian medical graduate is able to, say for example, perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation in the field settings. This could be a competency for me. Now, for an undergraduate student to be able to achieve this competency, the student needs to be able to do a lot many things across multiple domains. So, say for example, the student in the knowledge domain, the students might need to know correctly what's the ratio between chest compressions and, say for example, giving the breathing. Or in the affective domain, the student should be able to calm and compose the laypersons who would gather at a place where someone who might succumb in a field settings. In the psychomotor domain, the student should be able to really give chest compressions in the correct way, right? So these are the specific learning objectives. So specific learning objectives would be domain specific, whereas competency would encompass multiple domains, right? So I hope that I have clarified a little about the specific learning objectives.
Yeah, I think that example that you gave, I think that should clarify. So thank you for that. Uh, there is now one question has come up in the chat. I think I just saw that Dr. Kutsia has asked, "Sir, what does lighthouse effect mean in pedagogy?" Any thoughts on that?
I really don't know what is this particular terminology, so I'm sorry for this.
Yeah,
I'll also
yeah,
try and find it out.
yeah. Even I am not too much
But
aware.
thank you
What I
for
understand,
thank you
probably,
for asking
yeah,
this.
yeah. Yes, even I'm not very much aware, but I guess like we can all look up. I think it's something to do with being a lighthouse, something like that. But again, we will look up and then get back to you. But thank you for asking that. There is one more question which I
So
want to
Animesh sir,
ask.
I
In
just
fact,
wish to
yeah,
share this. I'm
tell
sorry
me.
to interrupt, but let's say if
No, no,
this
sure.
question comes up in your pedagogy exercise in your PG
Ah,
exam, feel free to say that you don't know. So let's say everything around pedagogy you are not expected to know, and I don't know the answer to this question. So it's completely fine. You might not be knowing some of the things, right?
all right. Yes. So there is, in fact, there were two questions which I have combined. Both are on similar lines. So somebody has asked about how do you what is the solution for the distractions arising from the class? And I believe this is like when somebody is taking a class and then there is distraction. And also someone has asked about kindly talk on classroom management. So if you could give some pointers to that.
Yes. So this is a very interesting thing. This would probably come up in the PG exam as well. Certain kind of this might come up, let's say, as a practical need. When you are demonstrating in PG exam the pedagogy exercise, and there is some amount of disruption, and the examiner would wish to check how are you able to handle that. Or usually might happen when you are actually taking teaching sessions with the students, and there would be some amount of disruptions, right? And then that falls largely under the domain of classroom management, or what we call as class control, right? So we would have observed many teachers in our life where some of those had a wonderful class control, in the sense that students would be attentive to what the teacher says, students would be focused on the topic for that particular thing, and the teacher is able to hold the entire class together on that particular topic, right? That's what I would describe as class control. And there are certain elements to class control. So what's the competency, or what would make a teacher have some amount of class control is, first thing would be a thorough knowledge around the topic on which you are talking about. So if the teacher is not well prepared, the teacher might fumble, and when the teacher fumbles, there would be disruptions. Second aspect is, so for example, when you are communicating to the students, you are communicating through multiple means. So your voice is one such mean, your body language, your voice modulation, all those things are also important. So if the students are getting adequate amount of stimulation with the way you are teaching, the students attention would usually stay there, right? So if you are using stimulus variation, if you are using say for example some pictures, some videos, some storytelling, some of the examples, and not just let's say sharing information to the students. If we just share information, students would be bored. So for example, if we ourselves would be students, we would be bored if the teacher just is sharing information and not sharing wisdom, not sharing experiences, or not sharing how we can possibly be using this, right? Voice modulation is something which is very important. The amplitude of voice is something which is extremely important. I have seen brilliant teachers who are very knowledgeable in their own subjects, but they speak at a very low volume, to the extent that only the front two batches students would be able to listen to them. So if they don't use mic, probably the fourth bench student would not be able to listen to them. Now it is through sessions of micro teaching they'll realize that I'm not really audible at the last bench, right? So if you are not audible at the last bench, obviously there is going to be some disruption within the class, because what would the student do? If the student is not able to listen to the teacher, the student cannot be engaged, right? So adequate amount of volume is something which is very much needed. So for example, and this volume does not mean that you are remaining strict, right? There is a fine difference between being aggressive and being assertive. So surely the teacher does not need to be passive, for sure, but the teacher needs to be assertive. That, say for example, this would happen very commonly when you crack a joke within the class, and then the students would go into a laughter session. And then when you want to bring the students back to a session, there are different methods different teachers use. Some of the teachers would raise their voice to a certain extent, so that the students would understand that now it's the time to go back to the topic original. Some of the teachers would take a little bit amount of pause to communicate to the students that the period for humor is over now and we can go back to the learning content once back, and so on. So a lot many things that the teacher, those facilitation skills that the teacher need to possess to be able to have some sort of class control. And so if an external agency or someone observer is remaining there, he would say that the classroom management of this particular teacher is good enough. Fine. Now having said all of that, there could be some students who might be distracting. Fine. So at such places, the most appropriate response would be to be a little bit more assertive rather than aggressive. Being aggressive within the classroom for a teacher, sometimes you might lose temper and be aggressive, but it would be good to not be too much of aggressive within the class, because it usually breaks the entire let's say effect of the entire class. कि अगर आपने किसी को डांट दिया, if you scold someone within the class, the class affect the feelings of the group as a whole usually go somewhere else, and then it takes some amount of time to bring the entire class back. It would also take you on the teacher himself or also some amount of time to bring back to the emotional state of normalcy. So that so if you do not lose control of your emotions, probably you would be able to better facilitate the session. So these are the some of the thoughts around classroom management that I wish to share.
Right. Thank you. I would move on to assessment, because what I've done is I've classified it into different. So what I talked about was methodology. I've also asked about classroom management and challenging situations. Now I'll move to assessment. Now I have two questions. One is, of course, it was there in the registration form, and I've seen now in the chat as well. Dr. Smita has put up. So somebody wants to know, and even Dr. Smita has put up, saying that we need to have an authentic checklist for assessment of a pedagogy session. So do you have one in mind? And then somebody wanted to also know, should we have medical education related aspects or terminologies included in that? Do you think we should ask questions related to medical education technology while in the pedagogy session? So should we ask that to the presenter?
Okay, so Anish, multiple questions. I hope I don't forget the questions, but the first thing that I
I'm
picked
here
up
to
was
remind you. Yeah.
so the first thing which I picked up was, can we have an authentic checklist to assess, say, for example, a micro teaching session? I would usually prefer. Now, I'm not sure whether there is an ideal answer to this or not, but I'll just share my perspective. I would feel that, and probably ideas similar to this you will find in the paper of micro teaching that I have shared in the slides. That paper also shares similar idea that uh, a teaching learning session is so much individualized and customized to the level of learners, to that group of learners. Say, for example, the learners of second MBBS in one medical college might be different from another medical college. From one country, second MBBS students would be different to another country students of second MBBS. So the learners would be different. The MBBS batch which came up in 1990 would be different compared to what we see the MBBS batch in 2023. Fine. The teacher has their own preferences. So some teachers might wish to use humor in their classes, some teachers are not so comfortable using humor, right? uh, and then a lot of what transpires within that let's say teaching session would also depend on the content, right? So there could be content such as breaking bad news where humor, say for example, would not at all be appropriate, versus there could be some places where humor, it might be okay to use humor, and so on. So the teacher, content, and students a lot many variations are there, which makes it very difficult to have a standardized checklist for assessing a pedagogy session. And hence many a times we feel that depending on what is being performed in front of you and what the teachers would feel, it would be best to judge it. So for example, many of us are teachers and we are comfortable with, let's say, OSCE versus mini CX. So I would say that look at it as a mini CX exercise where you as a teacher would evaluate the student in terms of what needed to happen in that particular session for that group of learner and with this particular teacher. That would be better. Rating the student on some kind of a global rating scale would be better rather than ticking, I mean, putting check marks. So for example, I'll just hypothetically in thinking that you are faculty in a medical college in Delhi, and the PG student who is giving exam is from Kerala. And then that PG students might have, let's say, language difficulties, right? So the checklist, how do you take care of those things? Or that PG students might have come from some cultural background, and the topic that PG student have chosen is somewhere from sociology, right? So it depends a lot on what should and can happen in that particular session. So I, in my own personal opinion, would not favor a checklist, because I mean, I would also have temptation. I would have temptation to write a paper on, let's say, what could be a one such sample checklist which could be used in pedagogy exercises. But then the fallacy would be that the teachers would be tempted कि ये tick mark नहीं हुआ, कि humor use नहीं किया इन्होंने. Fine. So that's problematic. Fine. See, sometimes voice modulation might not be needed, or many of the we I mean, why we feel, say for example, I would feel that I really enjoy teach. Why am I as a faculty in medical colleges, I enjoy this. And why do I enjoy this is because I get to talk to multiple level of learners from varied backgrounds, being able to teach multiple topics and being able to improvise. The same topic which I took 5 times is not the same. The fifth time I took it, it was I mean, way different than I taught the same topic first time. So it's that variety which is uh, which I enjoy. So why do I wish to, say for example, compartmentalize and standardize that process which is so natural, which is so pure, which is so creative? So if teachers, if I mean, we would be restricting teachers if we make a standardized checklist for pedagogy assessment. That's my take.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I'm taking a little longer to explain.
No, no, that's fine. Yeah. But having said that, I think a few what probably the question I think wanted to know was whether we should have a few basic things or not, which I think you have covered in your session as well. So having those things will definitely be important. And as you said, of course, we improve with experience. So I totally concur with that as well. Uh, One more thing was, should we ask medical education related technology, medical education technology related questions during the pedagogy session to the presenter? So that was another part of the question. I'm reminding you.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, I feel surely that should happen, and that's perfectly fine, because I mean that's the logical flow of information. Say, for example, if the student while and how do that get decided is if the PG student has performed really well in exhibiting one of the facilitation skills, the question would go on that. Or if the student has some deficiency or some need for improvement in some aspects of a facilitation skill. Say, for example, if the student was in the hurry that the student usually would wish to demonstrate everything that they want to, so they would be a little bit more faster. So teacher might feel that, the examiners might feel that you were faster than required. So then the question would come on that those lines, right? So surely those questions can be asked, and I would go on to say that there is no harm in asking those questions, those conceptual questions, in theory papers as well, where it's appropriate. We have 4 papers in MD Community Medicine where it's appropriate. This should, I mean, we should start asking those questions as well.
Right. So thank you. I think, yeah, basically the idea is to check their understanding and the grip over the this whole process, and also a little bit familiarity with the basic concepts of medical education. So that's why this session is there. Though somebody had actually mentioned in the registration that now the new curriculum which has come in, the CBME MD curriculum, in that pedagogy doesn't find a place. So what is your take on that, and how do we go about, should we still have pedagogy? So that was one of the things which was there in the form.
Okay, so Animesh sir, I assume that this question refers to the MD curriculum, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So I also looked at the MD curriculum today, and I also found that pedagogy as an element in the final MD exam is not there. And my take is that I'm fine with that particular thing, because sometimes, say for example, for the micro teaching also, many times people misinterpret micro teaching as something, a method where we put teacher under microscope, which means that makes that particular session as a little bit more threatening, where someone is going to be dissecting the way you behave, the way you speak, and so on. Fine. So which is, micro teaching is not that, right? So same way, I would feel that teaching is something which so creative process. So let's say if the student is expected to be demonstrating the same in exam, might not be the perfect way. So for teaching also, I would be perfectly fine if the teaching and improvisation on the competency acquisition on pedagogy skills happens in the formative phase across the 3 years of residency. Fine. So say for example, if the micro in some of the micro teaching sessions, when the peers give feedback, if that feedback is given to the PG teacher, or some of the faculties with which the student is comfortable working with, or if at some places when the student is comfortable, the faculty can remain observer in one of the teaching sessions of the PG when the UG teaching is happening. And if that can we can have a provision for recording this in the PG logbook. That would be probably a better way, because I mean, it's very difficult to check those things on last, and all of us have understood the fallacy of, let's say, the 2-day exam for let's say an MD community medicine, or for that matter any PG course. It's very difficult. So those are the thoughts.
True, that's true. Formative assessment, in fact, we are trying to move towards formative assessment even in the UG curriculum, provided we do it judiciously, we do it, with integrity. All those things are also there. But yeah, I think that's beyond the scope. But now I'll move on to some questions which I have classified as tips. Somebody wants to know how to score full marks in pedagogy.
Acha, okay. So I have a slide on this as well. So I thought if
Okay,
time permits, we'll share that slide. I'll just
you could
quickly.
do that. You could do that quickly. Yeah, you could do that quickly. If you project, I will share that.
Yeah.
And again, by the time the slides project, there is a question that, is there anything like ideal topic or ideal topics for pedagogy? What kind of topics should one select?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question, and honestly speaking, I do not have the answer to this question, that what's an ideal topic. But what could be a preferred topic? I would say any topic where you are comfortable delivering the session. So you, as a postgraduate student, you would feel that, say for example, I have a good hold on environment, or I have a good hold on nutrition sciences, and so on. So pick up something where you have a good hold. So obviously we clarified this at the start of the session, that the purpose of pedagogy session in the exam is not to check whether you are good at the content or not, but then a lot of your confidence would come from your good hold over the content as well. So if you are taking up something which you are, let's say, not very sure, if you are picking up biomedical waste and there is a recent development, new guideline has come up, and then you are not really sure as to what some of the aspects of those that new guideline really mean, fine, so it would be better to avoid. So although it's not compulsory, but then it would be good in the exam session to take up something where you have a good hold. Apart from choice of the topic, which is more important, is that take a very small portion of that particular topic, right? Because although you might have planned a very big session, obviously pedagogy exercise in real MD exam is not going to last very long, right? So if you planned very detailed things, something which you wish to demonstrate might come up at 45th minute, and then you would probably never have a chance to demonstrate the same thing in your pedagogy exercise session, right? So have a very small, and teachers would usually not expect you to be planning very big complex deliberate sessions. A teacher would be just fine if you plan a 30-minute session or 45-minute session. That would also be perfectly fine. So take a topic and take a small topic. So when you make a lesson plan, do not let's say पैक इट टू मच विद द कंटेंट कि मुझे एक ये टीचर का भी होता है बहुत टाइम मेनी टाइम्स न्यू टीचर्स और लेट्स से व्हेन वी आर द younger years of our career as a teacher, we feel that we should be able to cover everything, fine. So instead, the correct role of a teacher is to uncover, right, in the minds of the students. So teachers should never feel the pressure to cover a lot many things. So PG students, when pedagogy exercise appear in an exam, also should not be pressurizing themselves to cover too much. So just take up a small part, and agar aapne chota bhi liya, तो that would be better. You will be able to better deal with it. Fine. So prepare a small topic, and then what you deliver should be at the level of undergraduate students, right? So say for example, if I am talking about biomedical waste, what an undergraduate student needs to know is probably the correct way of segregation of waste, because every doctor needs to be performing that particular stage. Whereas, what are the, say, for example, the technical specifications for common biomedical waste treatment facility, that if the undergraduate doesn't know, that's perfectly fine. But you, as a PG students, as part of your preparation for those four papers in MT community exam, would have probably read the those technical guidelines on biomedical waste treatment facility as well. So that would be something which you would feel that you, obviously the examiners would probably wish to ask you. Those are the updates. So as exam preparation, you would be more closer to the updates part, which is at the periphery of the curriculum for the UG students. That's not core for the UG. So if, I mean, being able to differentiate for the pedagogy session, what content you would prefer would be at the core and not the periphery. Although you might be more familiar with the periphery when you are appearing for your exam. Second is, uh, you can take a printout of your slides as a backup. Fine. So let's say if there is an electricity failure and your PPT does not run, so you can still, so then your only option would be to switch back to the whiteboard. And then if you had the liberty to use those points for PowerPoint slides, you obviously have the liberty to refer back to those points from your handout, which is a printout of the same PPT slides, and then jot down those points on the whiteboard. Right. So feel free to use that as well, because we, all of us, are teachers, and we tend to forget many times. In fact, we have observed ourselves that when PPT was not there, we used to memorize a lot many contexts, and we used to make sure that we do not forget something. We used to write our notes with pen, and with the PPT coming up, let's say our ability is at a different level now. We are too much dependent on PPT, that if sometimes the electricity goes, probably we might be, it might so happen that we skip one or two important points which were there in the slides otherwise. So these are some of the thoughts I wanted to share.
Thank you, Dr. Parag. I think well sums up quite a few things. Just on the last point, yes, it's a very good idea to keep a backup or a handout or something which is printed with you. It really helps. And sometimes, in fact, we've had this in my experience, whether as an examiner outside or even here, we've had actual issue when there was a power failure or there was something wrong with the LCD and it won't budge. Now, what do? You can't wait forever. So, and also we've also had sometimes where we have simulated, even in our mock exams and all, where we've said, okay, now stop, uh, switch over, and then imagine that there's no power, and how do you go about? So that's what we've done also, just to challenge the postgraduate at that moment, just to see that how that person will respond to such a situation if it were to happen in real life. Okay, so that's also done. Some examiners, and there are some cheeky examiners, they may do this. They may just some of them might just ring a mobile, or maybe throw a chalk piece or something. So sometimes, not everybody, but there are some and different types of examiners, so they just want to check. So all these things, the basic thing is remain calm, don't lose your calm and and composure, and handle that. And it's always good to take a moment and then uh, articulate what you want to say, rather than immediately burst out or something, so that's something. uh, I would go back to one more question, which I would say that it's a kind of a mixed thing, tips as well as probably something related to the process of the exam of pedagogy. So someone had put up, at what confidence should we stick to our concept so that the external does not get offended?
Okay.
I mean, I presume it is like, see, I know my concept. I'm kind of sure, but at the same time, I don't like. I want to put it up, but how confidently, or how what's the trick? What's the balance, or something, probably like, how do I put it across, or diplomatically, or something like that? So any thoughts on that?
I'm not really sure whether I've understood this question correctly or not. This surely is a tricky question. At what say, for example, I would just wish to clarify that. PG exam is probably not a place where you wish to display what all things that you know or you are capable of, right? So this happens. I mean, this is once a generic tip which happens for exams, which happens for job interviews as well. So, say for example, if at certain places, if you feel that this is not a very big issue or very core issue, this is a trivial aspect, and you feel that your point of view is correct, but the examiner happens to have a different point of view, it would be best to respect the examiner and say that, sir, I'll read more about this and clarify my concept if it's a trivial aspect, right? So it would always be better not to, say for example, delve too much into the difference of opinion and sharing that. That's what my personal take would be on this.
Right. So yeah, I think fairly, and one thing is it's always like, whatever said and done, ultimately it's better in your interest not to dispute it overtly or something. Stick to your ground, but if you feel that the situation is going out of hand, you can just politely say that probably, like, I'll have to look it up again. This is what I understood, or this is what I know. However, you may be right, so I'll, don't be in a argument or something like a conflicting situation. That's what I would suggest, because ultimately you are in a hierarchical kind of situation, and sometimes it's not always good in our interest, in the long term interest, right? A lot of people have already asked about the resources, the books, anything that you can suggest, so which I think we will be sharing even in the YouTube description box. Dr. Parag has given me a list, and we've discussed about this even yesterday. So I think, do you want to comment anything, Dr. Parag, on this?
So most of the things that were included in the PPT slide, those references and few of the articles and books. I have made a short list of those resources. Maybe we'll share that on the WhatsApp group, and for later on, those audiences would watch it on YouTube. It would also go on the description of YouTube video.
Absolutely, definitely. I think I have almost covered all the questions that I could see. If I have missed out, could you please, somebody can remind me. But as I understand, I have exhausted my list of questions from the registration form as well as from the chat here. A lot of appreciation also coming in from some people, and that's nice. I'm happy that this session has met the objectives, and it has been able to deliver what we were trying to do it within the time frame that we had. It's just 2 minutes to close 7:30. So I just want to acknowledge again, first of all, Dr. Parag, thank you so much for, in fact, at a very short notice, you agreed. And it was really nice that you could give us this insight into this topic, which is very important, the pedagogy for postgraduates. At the same time, I would like to appreciate on a personal level a few people, right from creating a flyer. Dr. Poonam from Yanapaya Medical College, she was very helpful, and she shared the template earlier, which was there and which I modified from, so it was easier for me. Dr. Asha, who was initially there, she's been very, very helpful, and since for me this was a new platform to change, so she helped me. And of course, Dr. Parag yesterday was very patient, and we discussed a lot of things, and we tried out this platform. So thank you again to Dr. Asha and Dr. Parag. And I also want to thank IAPSM Karnataka chapter, and particularly Dr. Kulkarni, who's given me this responsibility to conduct a couple of months of this, so that we can go ahead with the programs and bring in diverse kind of experienced people. So let's see. And thank you all, the audience who've been here. We had at one time, I think, 80 plus people, and I think all of you would have definitely benefited. So thank you, and thank you for your comments, suggestion. Please do feel free to get in touch and also suggest some of the topics. We will try our best to incorporate some of those topics which you suggest in the future programs that we are planning. So with that, thank you one and all once again. Thank you so much. I hope you've had a fruitful learning experience.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
So I'll end this now. Thank you.